if we could package up sleep and put it into a pill, Big Pharma would be all over that. And like, how much would it cost? And like, would it be illegal because it would be so good?
What's your lack of sleep really costing you? Memory, judgment, empathy, maybe even truth. We say time is money, but sleep is the real currency, and most of us are quietly in the red. Today, I'm talking with Dr. Leah Kaylor, the FBI sleep expert and a licensed clinical psychologist. She supports agents after the Bureau's toughest moments. Her mission? Declassify rest. Better sleep shouldn't be top secret. And she's got practical, science-backed ways to get there. In this episode, we're questioning the assumptions. What actually happens when you sleep? How do our systems quietly engineer fatigue? Why does trauma come back at night? And why does felt safety matter? Tune in for the highest leverage shifts you can make this week without turning rest into another perfection project. I'm your host, Ryan Olekson, and this is Beyond 80%. Leah, it is so great to have you on Beyond 80% today. Welcome.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
I can't wait to talk about sleep. I actually got a great sleep last night. Yeah, that never happens. It's like my body knew. We're going to dive right into it today. So you are known as the FBI sleep expert. How did your path lead you to becoming a sleep expert in the FBI?
Yeah, I stumbled into this in the best possible way. So I was getting my Ph.D. at St. Louis University, and I always knew that I was going to do forensics, always knew that I wanted to do trauma. And then on my final year, which is like our residency year, which we go away to another location, and I had matched at the Memphis VA Medical Center, could not be more grateful that I stumbled into this sleep rotation. And it was such an eye-opening experience of how many people are struggling with sleep, but not just having a poor night's rest, it's having a hard time falling asleep, having a hard time staying asleep. Maybe it's sleep apnea, maybe it's nightmares. And we're not even getting into like much more complex things too. There's just so many ways to have issues with sleep. And it just kind of blew me away. And I got really excited about working with people and seeing them make changes, but then to see how many other things in their life it touches, because, they talk about sleep as being like one of the 3 pillars of health with like nutrition and exercise. I don't believe that. I believe that sleep is the foundation for which everything is built upon. Then fast forward, my first quote unquote real job is a psychologist with the FBI. And my supervisor at the very beginning was like, okay, Leah, so what's going to be your thing? And I just said, I don't know. I just got off a rotation at the sleep clinic. Like, how about we go with that? Because everybody can relate to having a crappy night's sleep, whether you have a pet that wakes you up in the middle of the night, you have chronic pain, you're too hot. It doesn't matter. Like, everyone can relate to that. Whenever it comes to mental health, we're doing better and better with regard to stigma. But I would say when it comes to law enforcement, whenever it comes to putting on that additional layer of being this most elite law enforcement agency in the entire world, I think people get kind of up in arms about, well, I don't know that I want to talk to a psychologist because maybe my gun or my badge or my clearance might be in jeopardy. And so I thought, well, not only are people struggling with sleep, but I imagine that I could kind of do like a little psychological trick where I kind of get my foot in the door. And then, maybe once you meet me and see that I'm really not that scary and I'm not going to ask you to lay down on my couch, we might be able to open the door and work on some other things. And that's exactly what happened. And so this is my 6th year full-time as an employee. And the interest and the need for sleep work one-on-one or nightmare work or just sleep education through like very big webinars and things like that have just grown tremendously. And so it's so incredibly exciting. And then that is also one of the drivers that pushed me to write my book, which is going to come out on October the 1st, 2025, called If Sleep Were a Drug.
Woohoo.
Yeah.
Man, you have so much going on. I actually love your entire pathway on how you got here, because when you hear that someone is joining the FBI, this is totally not in the realm of what you think that they're going to do. And you hit on something that was brilliant about to get people to talk to you about sleep, right? Because mental health, I don't even want to say problems, but just disruptions or whatever's going on, especially with agents, I would assume that sleep is always going to be part of that.
It is.
It's a really great, as you said, like a sneaky way in a good way to get someone to start opening up and talking to you about that. That's I love it. That's great.
Yeah, thanks.
And so along those lines, when was there a moment that you realized that sleep wasn't just about rest, but it affects performance, memory, and even mental health?
I would say there's a few people that I were like some of my very first sleep clients that I ever worked with, and just seeing, and again, I'm thinking back to the VA, and for whatever reason, I just had like a very large caseload of Vietnam veterans. And, these folks that I'm seeing are in the elderly age category at that point in time. And yet a lot of them served very young adulthood, like late teens, early 20s. And so it's something that had stuck with them so much that I'm seeing you now in very late adulthood. And yet a lot of your sleep struggles, a lot of your nightmares, a lot of reasons why you're not sleeping is tied to this thing that happened decades ago. So I think that I was just so blown away by, whoa, like not only are you having sleep issues, but this is something that is tied to something very historical. And I think that it's can just be very eye-opening, again, because I just kind of work in a really unique population with whether that's, first responders or agents or veterans of, maybe whoever's out there listening, civilians may not be thinking about that way. It might just be like, oh, well, I have a crap night's sleep, or, maybe I had too much caffeine. But for some people, it's very related to trauma or very historical trauma too.
Could it actually be a symptom of trauma that people don't know about?
100%. Yeah, absolutely. So I have a lot of mental health colleagues within the Bureau, and they will send me referrals all the time. Like, hey, Leah, do you have any openings on your caseload? I'm like, yeah, of course, send them over. There's, somebody who's having sleep problems. And I would say 9 times out of 10, and again, this is within my specific population of I'm helping agents, I'm helping their professional staff, I'm helping task force officers. So like it's all in-house, which I think is important to make that distinction, because a lot of people are like, oh, FBI, you must be going into the prisons and doing sleep work. And that's not who my population is. I serve our agents, professional staff, joint task force officers, and family members. And I should also mention that everything that I say here on this podcast are my own thoughts, feelings, opinions, behaviors. And this podcast is not sponsored by the FBI. So back to our regularly scheduled program. So I get tons of referrals for quote unquote sleep issues. And once we get down into it, and again, I think this is unique to the population that I work with, is that 9 times out of 10, I would say that it is untreated stress, trauma, depression, anxiety that is not being dealt with appropriately in the daytime. And then it's showing up and manifesting as a sleep issue. So no doubt about it, people are struggling with sleep. But I think that if we were to remove a lot of what it is that they see and what it is that they're exposed to, the magnitude and the severity of the sleep issues would not be nearly what they are.
I want to get into the basics of sleep a little bit. Why do we sleep, and what exactly happens during sleep?
Yeah, sleep is so, like, for the longest time, it has been so mysterious as to why we sleep, why it's important. And I think this question is so big. I mean, actually, there's another book out there that is one of my favorites, and it's called Why We Sleep. And so there's an entire book trying to answer the question that you just asked. But if we could just break it down absolutely into a nutshell, is that all the things that we're doing during the daytime is low level, like neurological damage, if you will. And that sounds like really extreme. But basically, when we are sleeping, we're going through such restorative and healing processes. So I think that kind of leads into what is happening during sleep. And I'm going to give an example of a normal, average, healthy sleeper. And this person's going to be an adult. So between the ages of 18 and 64, the recommended amount of sleep should be between 7 and 9 hours per night. That's going to be really important. The normal, average, healthy sleeper, as we're getting close to their bedtime, their eyes are probably starting to feel kind of heavy. They're going to start to be doing some of those nods. I like to call it the wave of sleepiness. That's how it starts, but it's actually called stage 1, light sleep. And then as we move down a little bit deeper, we get into stage 2, light sleep. And this is, again, very light. We might be awoken by sounds in the environment. But stage 2 sleep, and, a lot of people ask me questions about wearables, because they're like, oh my gosh, well, I spent half my night in light sleep. Yes, that's how much time you should be spending in light sleep. And we cycle through the stages, and I'm going to explain that here more in a minute. But light sleep doesn't mean that it's not useful or that it's not good. all of them serve really different and unique functions, but they also overlap a lot too. So whenever we're in light sleep, yeah, if you're looking at a wearable, you're probably spending about 45 to 50% of your sleep in light stage sleep. And that's kind of setting the stage for some other processes that are going to be helped along in deep sleep and REM sleep. So let's keep moving on. So the person is starting to feel sleepy. They're having that wave of sleepiness come on. They're dropping down into stage 2 light sleep. And then we should be dropping down into deep sleep. And this is at the early stages of the night. It's going to be important because I'm going to come back to this later. But deep sleep, it's really important for our physical body. So our blood pressure should drop. Our blood vessels should get a rest. Our heart should get a rest. If we haven't eaten too close to bedtime, all of our internal organs that have been digesting and breaking down food for us to have energy, they should all be having an opportunity to take a rest. There's going to be growth hormone that's being secreted that is going to help repair a lot of that damage at the cellular level, at the tissue level, at the muscle level. So there's a lot going on physically at deep sleep. And then we're going to pop up into REM. REM stands for rapid eye movement. And the way that we know people are in REM sleep is their eyes are darting back and forth underneath their eyelids. And REM sleep, and I just think that, God, sleep is so incredibly cool and exciting. And like, I'm such a nerd for it. But people think that when you go to bed and you turn off the light switch, that your brain and body also kind of go into this like offline, like airplane mode, which just couldn't be further from the truth. And I love to give this example because it really illustrates what's happening. So if we have someone who is in REM sleep and we put a cap with electrodes on them, and then we have someone who is awake and actively problem solving and we put a cap with electrodes on them, their brain waves look extremely similar. Crazy.
Interesting.
Crazy.
And the REM sleep is when, correct me if I'm wrong, is when we're dreaming. That's when our dreams are popping up.
Dreams most often occur in REM, and those are the ones that are vivid, the ones you can remember. Dreaming can occur in other places, but they might be very vague. But yes, that is correct. The dreams, especially the ones that we remember most often happen during REM, and oftentimes if you wake someone up during REM sleep, that they can kind of recall their dream right then and there for you, which is just kind of cool and interesting and maybe an experiment that you want to play around with. But yeah, REM sleep, and again, very, very much simplifying it, but I like to think about this one as being very mentally restorative. So if you ever had a problem that you were trying to solve and you just like couldn't figure it out, and then you woke up with the solution, maybe in the middle of the night or maybe the next day, and we say sleep on it, like that is that aha moment that our brain is figuring out problems and problem solving and doing it in a very innovative way while we're sleeping. Also, REM is super important for our emotional health. If we don't get enough REM sleep, and we'll talk about this more later, oftentimes we're feeling crabby, we are like not showing up as our best self, but REM helps us kind of emotionally recalibrate what's going on. And this kind of also ties in with the trauma that we talked about earlier, is whenever people experience something that's maybe painful or triggering or upsetting, our brain at night, especially in REM sleep, kind of acts as like an overnight therapist, if you will. For the normal, average, healthy sleeper, what should be happening, and this is just, again, so cool, is that noradrenaline, which is like a stress hormone that happens in your body, during REM sleep, that should be the only time that your brain does not have noradrenaline coursing through. And because of that, we believe that that is how the brain can take these upsetting and painful and triggering events or moments that have happened to us and kind of remove the emotional sting of that, but still keep the memory itself. This also ties into nightmares, which we can talk about later because that's kind of its own thing, and when the process like gets out of whack and goes off the rails. But that is a piece of what's happening in REM. And then also too, like just think about your average day and all the things that come into all of your senses. So like all the things coming into your eyes, all the things coming into your ears, all the things that you've touched, all the decisions that you've made, just being aware of like the environment around you. Like there's so many things that are coming in for your brain to process. And yet it's not important that we hang on to all that, nor should we. Like we don't need to be capturing every single detail of every single day. So the brain needs to decide at night what's important, what do I need to keep, what's trash. But not only that, where does it belong? Because we're not just throwing it on a heap of other memories. We need to figure out, where does this go in all of my existing neural networks and the memories that I currently have? So say, for example, you have a workflow that you're really good at, and then you just learned like a new shortcut, or maybe like, a way to do something on your keyboard. And you're like, oh, this is really important. This is like saved me a lot of time. I want to remember this. Okay, well, the brain isn't just going to throw it in there. It's going to figure out, okay, I'm going to pull up the file that has like this workflow in it. And then I'm going to figure out exactly within the workflow, like where that should go. It's integrating it into existing neural networks. So there's a lot of cool things that are happening. And I'm just going to kind of leave it at that. So that was just one sleep cycle, which is 90 minutes typically. And our normal average healthy sleeper is going to cycle through, we'll say like 5 of those a night. What I was saying earlier was our biggest chunk of deep sleep happens as we're falling asleep. Our biggest chunk of REM sleep happens as our alarm is going to go off. We are magicians and we make that work. And typically it happens because we're cutting sleep. Whether it's, I have to see the series finale, I'm going to stay up for one more episode, or, oh my gosh, if I don't finish this project, my boss is going to be on me. I'm going to get up early and I'm going to go into work early to make that happen. And so just giving people the information about if you choose to do that, you're cutting into deep. And remember, deep is very important for the physical body. If you are deciding, oh, I'll just wake up early, it's fine, you're cutting out on that REM. So all of the really important emotional and cognitive benefits.
Yeah, who doesn't do that, right?
Everybody.
So it's not about, oh, let me go to bed earlier and skip this finale, right? But I'll cut it out of sleep. One thing that just popped up into my head when you were talking about REM and how the eyes move back and forth, is there any connection there to some of the different therapies like EMDR or brain spotting or anything like that? Is that kind of where that came from?
I'm glad you asked. So yes, and just to give listeners a little bit of background, so my specialties are trauma and sleep. So with trauma, I'm certified in EMDR and brain spotting. And so whenever it comes to EMDR and I talk to people about it, I always like to give the disclaimer that the brain is incredible and it is the most complex device in the entire universe. And so there's still so much that we don't know about it. And then with EMDR, there's several different theories behind how it works. You are absolutely right in that one of the theories is that the eye movements back and forth, and that's how it originally started with Francine Shapiro, who created it. To give a little bit more background, she had been diagnosed with cancer and she was just, oh my gosh, so distressed about getting this diagnosis. And she goes on this very infamous walk on the park and she's thinking about this diagnosis. She's walking, and as she's walking, her eyes are kind of scanning back and forth on this path that she's going on. And she realizes that at the end of this walk that she's less distressed about it. She's feeling a little bit better. And she starts to bring people into her lab and she starts to do the same thing. She asks them, hey, think about something distressing. And the way that she recreates that walk in the park is she asks them to follow her fingers back and forth across their visual field. And that is fancy word, bilateral stimulation. But essentially what that is that we are moving both sides of the body so that we're activating both hemispheres of the brain so that they will talk to each other essentially. So yes, when Francine created this and was doing it with the eye movements, and we can still do EMDR with lots of different modalities, if you will, or different ways. One of the things that she had said before she passed was that she wished she didn't call it eye movement desensitization and reprocessing because there's a lot of different ways that you can do that. And I myself don't actually use the eye movements. I prefer to use tappers or other things to still get that bilateral stimulation because after a while it just really kind of hurts your arm doing this for hours upon hours with clients. But yes, you're exactly right that eye movement is thought to pull from REM sleep and all the healing, like overnight therapy that REM provides. So yeah, very, very astute observation.
What are like the top signs that someone's sleep debt is catching up to them?
I think that we have such a sleep debt problem, I would say. And one of the very interesting pieces of research that I was looking at a couple weeks ago was that not only are we chronically sleep deprived, and a lot of people probably would not identify with that. So let me just go back and define that term. So I had mentioned earlier, adults ages 18 to 64 should be getting 7 to 9 hours per night. And everyone's going to be a little bit different, but that is the recommended amount for that age category. if we are getting consistently, and that's the key word, consistently less than 7 hours of sleep per night, that is when we get into the category of sleep deprivation. And I think it's important to define this because a lot of people would not identify as being sleep deprived. Like, oh my gosh, that's someone who's been awake for 24 hours, 48 hours, they're in combat and they can't sleep, like something along those lines. But no, in fact, that is actually what the definition is, consistently less than 7 hours of sleep. So I want to set that up. But the research that I was looking at recently was that not only are we so chronically sleep deprived, but we cannot tell accurately that we are. We think we're functioning just fine when the research actually tells us, oh, no, you are impaired. So that's something that I think is really important, in that attempting to recognize that in yourself, maybe or maybe not, that you can be so self-reflective and have a way to figure out that you are not performing at your peak. And again, the kicker is, as we continue to be chronically sleep deprived, not only are we not aware of how it's impacting our functioning, but we sort of adapt to this new normal, this tired, sleepy, fatigued, lesser version of ourselves, if you will. Hopefully people are able to be self-reflective and realize whenever they've had a poor night's sleep. I know for me, and again, this is probably because I eat, breathe, and sleep. So if I say, for example, like I have to get on an early morning plane, which is going to happen here in a couple days, and that's going to cut into my REM, I am very aware that I am very snippy on days like that. So I would say just kind of getting in touch with yourself and seeing oh, how's my emotional health? And maybe too, not just being self-reflective, but maybe asking people who are close to you, friends or family, are you noticing differences in me? Are there changes? So I think that there are probably ways to figure that out. Maybe if you're doing some journaling and you have some different prompts to ask yourself as far as how you slept and how you're feeling, as far as how's my body, how's my mental health, how's my relationships with other people. I think that might be a way to kind of get a handle on it. The sad news is that we think we're functioning just fine when in reality the research tells us that we are not.
So what about naps? If we're looking at this from a debt scenario, right? What are your take on naps to make up some of those hours that we might have missed?
Yeah. So I'm going to set the record straight right now. Sleep debt is very, very harmful. It's kind of like working with a loan shark. You can never fully repay the sleep debt that you have accumulated. And that's what's very scary. I have a couple of different things that I want to say here. When it comes to naps, first and foremost, when it comes to safety, all bets are off. If you're behind the wheel and you're sleepy, if you're doing something and your safety, the safety of others is at risk, all bets are off. Go nap, go get to a place where you are no longer going to be in danger. So that's first and foremost. Second, I work with a lot of people who have trouble falling asleep, staying asleep, you name it. So for those people, I do not recommend naps because that's only throwing things into a worse cycle, if you will. Because what should be happening during the daytime is when you wake up, your sleep pressure or your sleep drive should be very low. And it should build and build and build all day long until it gets to bedtime. And that's what causes that wave of sleepiness that we talked about before. If you decide that you're going to take a nap in the middle of the day, depending upon what time of day that nap was, how long the nap was, that's going to impact your sleep pressure and how sleepy you feel at night. So I imagine a lot of people who are listening here can relate to taking a nap in the daytime, maybe intentional, maybe unintentional. Maybe you were having a lazy day on the couch and you fell asleep for a while. Oftentimes when that happens is when we get to our bedtime, we don't feel sleepy like we should. Our sleep's just very shallow. It's fragmented. It's just not the quality sleep that we could get. So when I'm working with people, I really don't endorse naps because I know what your problems are, and the naps are only going to get us into this cycle that's going to just keep perpetuating poor sleep. Now, if you are that person who sleeps wonderfully and you're not having issues and you're just excited to listen to this podcast, fantastic. I salute you. I'm excited for you. Naps may be an option for you. And what I would recommend is no more than 20 minutes because we know that will give you some benefits as far as some learning, some memory, some attention, some productivity. So you get a nice little boost there. But beyond 20 minutes, we start to dip down into deep sleep. And that's where we kind of get that what's called sleep inertia. And it's kind of this groggy, oh my God, what year is it feeling, like a sleep hangover. Nobody likes that. So at 20 minutes, that's kind of like the sweet spot where if we wake up at 20 minutes for the nap, then we can kind of prevent having too much of that sleep inertia or that sleep hangover. And again, I recommend doing this in the early afternoon. So I don't want to see anybody doing this later than 2 p.m. So if you're going to nap, that's an option for you, but we're not necessarily catching up on sleep. We're not banking sleep. There's a lot of research out there to show that a lot of people during the work week, so Monday through Friday, just because of all the things that we have going on and all the priorities and things that are vying for our attention, that oftentimes we cut on sleep there. And then on the weekend, we quote unquote try and catch up. But all the research tells us that even if you're sleeping an extra 1, 2, 3 hours on the weekend, you will never fully restore the total sleep time, the total amount of REM, the total amount of deep that you have lost.
Oh, thank gosh, because I thought you were going to leave it as napping is not good. And I am 100% a napper. But I will tell you that the best naps are those 20 minutes. That's so funny because, anything longer, you wake up and you don't even know what dimension you're in. So that's really interesting to hear that.
Yeah, there's just so much research out there and it's so interesting. And there's research to show, what does a 5-minute nap help you with? A 10-minute? And basically, the concurrence is that 20 minutes is a really lovely sweet spot to get some benefits, not cut into your sleep pressure too much. Again, if you are a normal, average, healthy sleeper who doesn't have problems falling or staying asleep at night. If you are, I do not recommend naps. But if you're not someone who has nightly sleep issues, then that's your sweet spot.
And what about just the work week overall in terms of timing? Because, we all kind of operate, most of us, right? Some people work night shifts and all that, but most of us work on a 9-to-5 schedule. And so we're getting up, let's say 6 o'clock. If we're really talented, we get up earlier and work out, and we're going to bed around 10, 11. But is that natural to human beings, that time period? Because when I think of Europe, they get up around, let's say 7, 8 a.m. and then they have a nice long siesta in the middle of the day. And then they're back and they're up until midnight every night eating dinner. So how does the timing and that culture play into it?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it's a tough question too. One of the things that I'll say is, if we go all the way back to our caveman ancestors, the way that we were programmed was to, when the sun is rising, that's when it's time for us to wake up, because light is going to be our strongest cue for our circadian rhythm, or just like our body rhythms. That might be another way that you've heard it. As the sun is up, we know that we're supposed to be awake, doing things. Our caveman ancestors were probably hunting, gathering, making shelter. And then as the sun went down, then that was the cue from the sun as it's going down that our bodies are starting to release melatonin and letting us know that it's time to go to sleep, that it's time to feel sleepy. So I would say if we go all the way back, that is how we're supposed to be programmed. We have so many things that are vying for our time. And I also want to talk about chronotypes too. But I think it's really important that people know how much sleep they naturally need and what their body wants. And I have this really interesting suggestion for people. If you don't know how much sleep you normally need, again, within that 7 to 9 adult age frame, my recommendation to you is to go on a vacation. And one that is not jam-packed with activities, one where you're not running ragged, but one where it's very relaxing and very soothing, and hopefully you can leave all your work stuff behind, and that you can wake up when your body naturally wants to wake up, and you can go to sleep when your body naturally wants to go to sleep. Because I think a piece of this that we're missing too is chronotype. And I think that we're only now as a society starting to realize it and take it seriously, but we're not taking it seriously in the way that we should. So we have some people who, as you've probably heard, are early birds, and those are the people who naturally like to wake up early in the morning, and they like to get their day started, and that's when they have a lot of energy. And then as the day kind of goes on, and this is definitely me, you can ask my friends, as the day goes on, I'm brr, 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 just shutting down.
Yes, that's me too.
But you know what? One of my really good friends, she's kind of like a vampire. She's this night owl where she's up all night long and she's going to bed when the sun's coming up. And she's a very extreme night owl chronotype. And so I think that we need to take that into consideration because that's very heavily influenced by genetics. But you also had mentioned just the pressures of our work schedule and getting up and making sure that the kids are ready to go to school on time and making sure that we get our workouts in. So I think that there's a lot of different external pressures that are changing the way that our sleep might naturally look. And then also talking about light too. Our caveman ancestors, they didn't have clocks or alarms or watches because they didn't need it. They work with the sun. But ever since we had the invention of electricity and lights, think about going into a casino. It's purposely very disorienting because it's very bright. There's a lot of sounds. They're pumping like fresh oxygen in there. And so it's very confusing to know what time of day it is. We kind of artificially do that too with our lights and our screens and just having light any time that we want compared to when we used to be tied just to the sun. So to answer your question, I think there's so many different factors at play. And if we could remove a lot of external influences, we could see what our bodies would naturally want to do. But to return to your question about the siesta too, our bodies, and everybody I think can relate to this, is kind of having that like post-lunch slump. But the research has shown that whether you have a big lunch, a little lunch, no lunch, that dip is something that happens to most people. It's a really interesting thing. And I think that, again, if we took a lot of external influences out of it and just let our body do what it needs to do, that we would have a lot better idea of what our sleep actually wants to look like and naturally should look like.
I've heard that slump is related to blood sugar or eating too many carbs, but what you're suggesting is that it's very natural within the human cadence throughout the day.
Yeah, it is. And that's what's so interesting, again, if we go back to the research, is that post-lunch slump happens even if you didn't eat lunch. So it is just something that our bodies will do. And I think that there are some days where it's much more pronounced for people than others. I'm just thinking about my day today and I'm like, oh my gosh, what time is it? So I definitely didn't go through that. So I would say like how busy you are, how engaged you are, how much movement, how much I would say like fresh air. So I think there's a lot of things that play into it, but we do know that is normal and it's not actually tied to whether you ate or not.
That's super cool. I'm actually glad to know. I'm walking away with about 7 new tips and I'm like, can't wait.
Yay!
I'm a personal trainer. So I'm like, oh, I can't wait to share that one, sprinkle it around a little bit. Before we kind of switch into the trauma piece of this, what is some research or statistics that you would really like to underscore just how essential sleep is for human functioning?
Oh, this is my favorite. Okay. I give tons of sleep lectures, and within the Bureau, our conferences are usually on the smaller side. So it is one day, a lineup of speakers, we're all in the same room. It is a captive audience. And normally I think people don't give two shits about sleep, but I'm there and I'm excited and I want to tell you about it. And so I've started to kind of use this technique to get people interested and excited, because I also like to do Q&A because I think it's so interesting. Rather than me just talking at you and telling you what I think you need to know, I'd rather you ask me questions and then I can kind of tailor my answers to you. And so I had started to try and do Q&A and I got a lot of crickets and I'm like, okay, let me recalibrate. I started out by asking people, how many hours of sleep they were getting. Okay, raise your hand if you're getting 9, 8, 7, 6. Okay. When we are not sleeping well, one of the most important and I think coolest functions that your body does is that inside your brain, during deep sleep, your brain shrinks up. And then we have cerebral spinal fluid from the spinal cord coming up and kind of giving your brain this car wash. I used to call it a brain wash. I don't call it that anymore. It gives your brain just this power wash of getting all the gunk and junk and toxins and misfolded proteins. And it's kind of like if New York City shrunk up and we were able to give it a real nice power wash. Wouldn't that be lovely? And then it takes all this waste and junk and it takes it out of the body as waste. Why that is so important is that throughout the day, we're building up all kinds of toxins and misfolded proteins and things that are just kind of junk and debris that don't need to be there. And the reason why this is so important is that these junks are, a lot of times you'll hear tau or beta amyloid, and those words are often associated with our neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's, like Parkinson's disease. When I say that, it really perks people up. They're listening now. When we are not giving our body this opportunity for sleep and for this lovely brain car wash to remove all these toxins, they're starting to accumulate. And it's kind of like if you put your trash out on the curb and whatever day of the week, your trash management people come and they take it away and you never think twice about it. If they didn't show up, we would still keep making trash and we would still keep putting it out there, and then it's going to smell We're probably going to get some rodents. Like, it's going to be a health hazard. Like, this is not a good situation in any way, shape, or form. And so that's kind of the way that we need to think about the brain, is if we're not allowing ourselves to get this really important full night of deep restorative rest, that we're allowing those toxins and proteins to build up. Now, one thing I want to be very, very clear about is I'm not saying that poor sleep will 100% have you cause dementia. That is not what I'm saying, because we know that there's a lot of different factors that play in, whether it's genetics, lifestyle, lots of different things. So I'm not saying one causes the other, but what I am saying is that research shows that these toxins that are getting wiped away are often the toxins that are associated with neurodegenerative disorders. So I think that if people are interested in, having a long, not just lifespan, but health span where you continue to take care of yourself and have your memory and get a chance to do the things that you want to do, is going to be really, really important that we prioritize sleep now.
Yeah, I could see how that would definitely grab someone's attention very quickly.
That's my favorite one.
Even, we're talking about dementia and Alzheimer's, but I'm sure there's a slew of other degenerative diseases, maybe even cancers that, sleep could absolutely be a factor for that.
Yes. Again, we could spend hours here talking and touching upon so many different things, but that's my favorite headliner. But yeah, you're exactly right. Cancer is absolutely associated with it. So it's just, when we're not sleeping, we're causing ourselves a slew of health problems.
You have me convinced.
Yeah, thanks.
At the very least.
And I think that we need to have a little bit of a conversation about dopamine, right? Because I think one of the things that we've preached for so long is blue light, and not to downplay that, but there's research out there now that shows that maybe blue light isn't the whole story, but maybe it's how we're engaging with that blue light that's coming from screens. So are we gaming? Are we getting into a really heated social media conspiracy? Are we doing something that's just really exciting for the brain? And so that is when we release dopamine. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter that is associated with pleasure and reward, and it's also has a big hand in addiction too. So whenever we're doing something on our phone, especially whenever it's very close to our face, right before bed, and we're doing something that's exciting and engaging, sleep has a hard time competing. And it's unfortunate because sleep has so many incredible benefits, but they're not immediate, they're not tangible. So dopamine can kind of just take over, and that's how we end up scrolling and then thinking, oh my God, is it that time? How did we get here? And so it's so important to talk about that, because I think that everybody has this issue. One thing that and part of the reason why I named the book If Sleep Were a Drug is, if sleep were a drug, and if we took it as seriously as we should, that it could be this incredible performance enhancer. And I think that is something that, as we reframe it for performance enhancement and to be performing at your peak, I think a lot of people are then, you've got me. I would love to be a better SWAT operator. I would love to, you fill in the blank. And so I think that we need to start reframing sleep as, rather than something that happens to you every single night, but how can you capitalize on it? And I wanted the title of the book to kind of create some curiosity, because if we could package up sleep and put it into a pill, Big Pharma would be all over that. And how much would it cost? And would it be illegal because it would be so good? So it's just kind of an interesting way to think about it. And yet you do have access to it every single night. You just need to take advantage of it.
So let's jump into trauma a little bit more, and especially nightmares, because that's definitely something I want to hit on. So very simply, how does trauma show up in somebody's sleep?
Yeah, I'm going to do a little bit of a refresher on REM again, and then I'm going to talk about nightmares. So REM is the time of night before our alarm clock goes off. That's where we're getting our biggest chunk, where kind of our overnight therapist. It's also whenever our brain should be devoid of noradrenaline. And that is just allowing for a place that's going to be calm. And you can think of your brain as kind of a therapist that's going to bring up some things that were upsetting, that were painful, that were triggering, that we need to work through. If we are this normal sleeper, we are going to be able to sleep through this, and that the brain is going to work through and process these things and take the sting out of it, but still keeping that memory, because that's still a part of your life story and who you are. And then kind of filing that back in the memory filing cabinet of where it belongs chronologically. Now, things go haywire whenever it comes to trauma. And I think we need to talk a little bit about the daytime too of what's happening. When something very traumatic happens, or life-threatening, or just really upsetting, the hippocampus, that has a lot to do with memory, cortisol is released. Cortisol is our stress hormone, and cortisol is a magnet to the hippocampus. I don't know why Mother Nature did this, but cortisol is toxic to the hippocampus. So that's oftentimes why we have very fragmented memories for trauma. The traumatic event may have happened in the blink of an eye, but when we're kind of reliving it, it feels like it took forever, or like I couldn't move. I was just stuck in that. Another thing that happens is that the brain has a hard time like putting a date and a timestamp on it. If we think about going out to dinner last night, probably very basic, probably something that a lot of people do regularly. And so you know when you got there, you probably remember how long it took, and you remember leaving the restaurant, and you probably think, oh yeah, like I know what day that happened. Yeah, we were probably at the restaurant for about 2 hours. Like you have a good sense of time. When things go haywire with trauma, we have a very hard time putting a date and a timestamp on it. And so oftentimes, whenever we're kind of having a flashback or we're reliving it, it feels like we are right there. We are right back in it. Not that it happened in the past, but we are here right now. So that's something that kind of goes off the rails. Also, if someone has a weapon, our focus is just totally on the weapon and we can't give details about anything else. And I think that we can also think about that of if you're, say, for example, like responding to a crime scene, chances are that your memories are going to be kind of fragmented because maybe you're hearing the screams or you're focusing in on broken glass or this or that. And so what I'll find is a lot of times, especially if like a group of people went out to, say, a mass casualty or something, and then we're kind of doing a group debriefing, a lot of times people are helping each other fill in the memories because I have pieces here and there and you have pieces here and there. And so it's very, very fragmented. And this is all because of cortisol and it just attacking the hippocampus. It just kind of having very, very fragmented memories. That's why we need to talk about it in the daytime. Then at nighttime, our brain is going to cycle, if you're a normal, average, healthy sleeper, through light, deep, and REM, and it's going to keep doing that throughout the night. And during REM, this is when we're processing things. So this is when our overnight therapist comes out. What should be happening is that our brain should be devoid of noradrenaline. However, what we're seeing, especially whenever people have symptoms of post-traumatic stress injury, is that those chemicals are high, their adrenaline is high, their cortisol is high. And so the brain is trying to process through this, it wants to, and yet these stress hormones and chemicals are just way too high. And so that's where we see the nightmares happen. And that's pulling you out of sleep. The brain doesn't like things to be left unfinished. So the next night it comes back and it's like, hey, overnight therapist, we still need to work on this. This hasn't been finished yet. And again, our stress hormones are just so high and we're trying to process through it and we unsuccessfully can't. And we're woken up again out of sleep in a nightmare. The brain is just trying so hard to process and it's just acting like a broken record. So that's what's happening with nightmares. There's a few different ways that we can treat this.
Let me just pause real quick. I understand how the brain is processing through that REM cycle. Totally makes sense. Now, I want to bring in this other element of when we don't deal with emotions physically. And I would assume for agents, they can't run away. They're there to protect or whatever is happening, right? So they can't have those normal fight or flight responses. When those emotions get stuck within the body, how does that show up? Does that still get processed during REM, or is that more that light sleep when our body gets restored, or does it happen at all?
Ooh, that's a great question. And I'm honestly not sure about the answer to that. Kind of, if I'm understanding you correctly, kind of like the body keeps the score. Yeah, that's a great question. And the way that I would conceptualize that is thinking about what we call like completing the stress cycle, if you will. And I have a whole chapter on this, which I'm very excited about. Thinking about it like a wave, this wave coming up. And for those of you who are listening, I'm trying to show it with my hands. And this wave is coming up and it's like cresting, it's getting to its highest point, and then it's crashing and it's coming back down. And then it's coming to this gentle end point, if you will, this natural end point. When we are going through something like that, yeah, like being at a tough scene and our adrenaline and our cortisol are so high, we need to be able to finish that stress cycle and whatever that looks like. So like you're saying, they can't just run away. How can we finish that stress cycle? And that is a great question. And that's something that I'm trying to figure out ways to show people. Whenever I ask people, especially agents, what's your go-to coping mechanism? A lot of them say exercise. And that makes a lot of sense because whenever we have all these fight or flight chemicals rocking and rolling in the body, that's a great way. Movement is a great way to kind of shake off that excess stress energy, if you will. But one of the really cool things, and we can kind of, again, like learn this from Mother Nature, is if you've ever seen any of those like Animal Planet documentaries, or even if you think about your dog, where like the gazelle is like so nearly in danger and something like so life-threatening almost happens, and then they run off, and then they do this like full body shake, and it's like, oh, we're cool now. It's the same thing with dogs, you know, like I love watching my dog, and I'm like, you are just so cool. So basically like that shaking off process, and if you're not familiar, like we can also repeat this in humans too, of like kind of doing this full body shake for like a minute or two to kind of also like shake off the adrenaline and the cortisol. So I think that there are ways to do that while we're awake. But for sleeping, that's a great question, and I need to think about that more to really be able to answer you effectively.
I love that you brought up the shake response too, because I think we're so unique as humans that, when you're sitting in a meeting and you feel embarrassed or you have a moment of shame or someone makes you upset, you can't necessarily get up like the gazelle and run and do your shake off, right? Like you have to kind of sit with it. And everyone's probably relating to that moment where you're so uncomfortable in that moment. But anyway,
listen,
we can move
hot
on
tip,
from it.
like I go into the bathroom all the time and do like a shake it off, whatever. Go find that moment of privacy and do what it is that you need to do to kind of release some of that excess stress that's holding you down.
But let's circle back into during the sleep and trauma and how we start to deal with that and heal those people from those nightmares.
Yeah, so my favorite, I love it. It's been so effective for the people that I work with, and it is called imagery rehearsal therapy, and it works fabulously for recurrent nightmares. And this is really important because sometimes we'll have like a nightmare here, a nightmare there, like it's kind of amorphous, like we know it was a bad dream, like I woke up feeling crappy, but like I can't really put my finger on it. Imagery rehearsal therapy, IRT, is great for recurring dreams that happen over and over again, and we just kind of can't seem to like move past it. Honestly, the process is incredibly simple. What it is that you work with a mental health professional, you tell them what the recurring dream is, and so they really get a very good understanding of what is it, what are you seeing, what are you feeling, what are you hearing, what are you smelling? Take me into this dream world with you. And then we work to create a new story. I should say a new ending. And this new ending is going to be positive or it's going to be neutral. So we're going to start the nightmare the same way. So I'm going to give an example without giving too much detail, but this is a real case of this person who had never been in a plane accident, but continued to have this nightmare over and over again. He's in the plane. This was something that he used to do a lot for his position. And things start to go haywire. The plane starts to go down. In the nightmare, it crashes. And so he comes to me and we need to do imagery rehearsal therapy. As we are thinking about this new dream, we need to rewrite the ending. So we're still in the plane, things are starting to go haywire, but what are we going to do? We need to work together, but really the answer needs to come from him as far as what it is that he wants to do. And one cool thing about dreams is that dreams don't play by the rules of waking world, where they can be bizarre and fantastical, and it doesn't have to make any sense. So if you want to, grab a parachute and jump out the back like 007, if you want to sprout wings and like fly away, like you can do whatever it is that you need to do, or you can make it, very reality based of like, oh, I get out the manual and I beep, boop, boop, I push the buttons and then, I fix the problem, whatever. So the person needs to figure out on their end what's going to be a neutral or positive ending to this dream. And once we come up with that, that is it. So that person then has homework where they need to practice this dream every day, probably about 20 minutes during the daytime in a calm, quiet environment so that they are just kind of starting to ingrain this in their brain. And then what happens at night, and this will take a while, it will take several weeks, but basically what happens and the reason why we keep the same beginning of the dream is that eventually at night we can kind of do like a swapperoo and like switch tapes so that we're taking the old nightmare out and we're swapping it with this new neutral or positive ending so that the brain eventually will just start to take that over, and then it's not nearly as distressing. We can kind of just sleep and process through it. And that's what eventually will happen. And then eventually that nightmare normally just dissipates completely, or the person just doesn't remember having it. So it's incredibly cool, but it does take time. It does not happen overnight.
So let's get a little practical about sleep in general, just as we're kind of wrapping up here. What is one underrated but powerful change someone can make today to improve their sleep tonight?
I would say at night or in the evening as you're starting to wind down, one of the things that I like to do is I like to just avoid overhead lights as much as I can. I like to open up my blinds. We have like French doors. And so I like to get as much natural light in my home as possible. And I also just like watching the sunset and allowing that to happen and not turning on overheads for as long as I can. And then when I do, I'll turn on a lamp. And then I also have some smart bulbs where I will change the settings to like red and orange. So I am trying to capitalize again on our caveman ancestors and trying to keep with that rhythm of the sun, because I do think that it's so important. So that's one of the, I would say, like just very quick, easy, simple things is just, whenever you're at home at night, do not be blasting yourself with all of the overheads.
It sounds relaxing too to be able to do that, just that moment.
It's really nice.
Yeah, and watch the sunset. I love that one. Mm-hmm. So you had mentioned the wearables before. Can people over-optimize their sleep? Is it worth freaking out about if you have all these different cycles? Talk to us a little bit about going too far with the wearables.
Yeah, and you're talking to me right now. I'm wearing 3. Here's the thing, because I've been having a lot of conversations about wearables lately, and there is such a thing as going overboard and doing too much, and it's called orthosomnia. Hopefully you're getting really excited about sleep after hearing this conversation. Orthosomnia is when you get to the point of like overdoing it so much that then you're having about anxiety about, am I doing it right? Am I doing enough? Why, I thought I slept really well. Why is the app telling me that I didn't? So I think that we can definitely take it too far. I would say that I have seen a change in myself where, even though I'm wearing 3 and I have a smart bed, honestly, I've gotten to the point where I almost rarely even open any of these apps and really take a look. I would say that maybe more so they're a visual cue for me to make sure that I get up and I take my steps, or that I exercise, or that I'm just having a healthy lifestyle. I've gotten much more in tune, and I kind of prefer this, and I think that this is probably the way that I'll continue to move forward, is just being in touch with my body and like, how do I feel like I slept last night, and how refreshed am I feeling, and how much caffeine do I feel like I need? That's what I'm much more in tune with right now. So even though it's very exciting and fun and, you can get all kinds of different metrics, there definitely is a way to go overboard. But at the same time, if you're listening and you're excited and that you want to put in the effort that it takes to get better sleep, then that's really exciting. And I hope that the wearables help you. So I think it's just a fine line that I would say of getting into it and allowing it to be an adjunct for you, but not allowing it to completely take over.
Well said. I think that's fair. And just as my last question for you, what's one question people should be asking about sleep but rarely do?
The first thing that came to mind, if you're going under the knife, if you're going to have a surgery, if you are going to be having some type of procedure, you're no longer in control, asking your surgeon, your doctor, whoever that person is, how well they slept last night.
That's a good one. I would not have thought of that. Yeah. That's a really good one.
Yeah, because just as we know, whenever it comes to fatigues, and especially when we're talking about hospitals and nurses and people who are kind of working around the clock or being on call or all those different things, there's an incredible rate of accidents and mistakes and medical mishaps that happen that if we could just allow people to sleep the way that they need to, and that's a whole nother systemic, larger conversation to be having. Maybe, if they're honest with you, and I've actually, now that I've been having a lot of these conversations where someone actually has said, no, you know what, we're going to reschedule this.
Yeah. So what hour, so if they said, I got 7 hours of sleep, that would be okay. But if they said something like, I got 4 hours of sleep, is that something that people should be like, maybe we should reschedule?
Yeah, and I would turn that into a conversation of like, how are you doing today? Like, how are you feeling? How did you sleep last night? Like, how are things looking for our procedure? And I would want to know that. In 4 hours, like for those who are just listening audio wise, like my eyeballs got real wide of like, oh, I'm super concerned. Like I'll see you on the way out. Like I'm leaving. Yeah, you're not going to touch me.
Dr. Leah, just as we're about to close out, and thank you, can you tell listeners one more time the name of your book and when it's coming out and where they can find some more information about it?
So the title of the book is If Sleep Were a Drug. It's coming out on October 1st, 2025. And my name is Dr. Leah Kaylor. That's the name of my website, my LinkedIn, my social media. So you can find me on all the places at Dr. Leah Kaylor.
Thank you so much for joining us today. And I always love picking up new knowledge. You've taught us a lot. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. This is so exciting. I love talking about sleep. And I do hope that, it helps people. Sleep is the foundation for everything. So, it can improve so many different areas of your life if you let it.
If you want to go deeper, Dr. Leah Kaylor's upcoming book, If Sleep Were a Drug, will be available for purchase on October 1st. You'll find all the details on how to get your copy in the episode show notes below. I'm your host, Ryan Olekson, and this is Beyond 80%.